All right, we are on air. It is Thursday, October 11th, and this is a meeting to check in on active development tasks for Backdrop CMS. Before we get into the project itself, I just wanted to thank everybody who's been working on all of the new beauty tips module ports, keeping the Jeff Robbins legacy alive, we mentioned pre-meeting. And if you're interested in hearing about how things are going for the backdropcms.org update, you can watch the design meeting, which we had about an hour ago, where we chatted about how we needed some more help with that. Let's see. So that is all we have for non-product related issues. So I want to turn it over to Nate to talk about Backdrop releases.
Hey, yes. Okay, so lots of things are happening in the world of Backdrop. First of all, we had a release yesterday. We had a bug fix release, the 1.1.1 release, or 1.11.1 as it is, which is kind of exciting. That won't happen again until we release 2.22.2, so that could be a while. So the security release yesterday, it was the first bug fix release for the 1.11 branch. And normally we release a 1.11, or we release a bug fix release a couple weeks after the release of a minor, but it's been almost a month now, actually. We just didn't encounter any substantial bugs of note in the 1.11 release, which, hey, that's awesome. So also kind of something interesting of note is that the 1.11.1 release yesterday, we had an independent security researcher contact us about the security hole that was found in Backdrop. It was just an XSS, which is one of the most common forms of security holes, which was great. First of all, that he audited it Backdrop specifically. This wasn't something that was a side effect from Drupal. So thank you very much for doing that audit. But also, he was very keen on getting a CVE reported on it. And we haven't been doing CVEs explicitly prior to this release. So we've been doing security announcements where we announce it on backdropcms.org, but we have not been acquiring CVE IDs, which is kind of like a global canonical list of security issues across all, in theory, all software. So we did request our first CVE. We haven't actually received the ID back yet. Sometimes it takes a couple of days. But once we have that, then this will mark our first time that we've actually reported security issues outside of backdropcms.org itself. So an adjustment to our policies there, but one that is good for the health of the project. Let's see, the Pantheon upstream for 1.11.1, and I think the platform upstream, those have not yet been updated. We did get some conflicts during the merge, but that should be available shortly. That's it for the release that came out yesterday, 1.11.1. The next bug fix release will be 1.11.2. And the only items of note that we have here that we would like to get addressed as soon as possible, it is two items that cropped up in the 1.11 release regarding color module. One of them is that Basis is now colorizable, but does not include any predefined color schemes. And so we'd like to include some out-of-box color schemes for Basis. And because this is a UX improvement, we will include it in a bug fix release. So 3209 is that particular issue. There's been a request that we run it through an accessibility checker, and also if anyone wants to lend a design eye, that would also be appreciated. Jen, do you recall, is there a pull request on this particular issue yet?
I don't think there is.
Oh, yeah, there is. Odaya created one, created an initial PR, but it's still marked needs work. Let's see. Also, related to color module, the color preview does not work correctly in Safari, and that issue is 3295. And I don't think that there's been any progress on this other than we've now been able to confirm that the issue exists. But there's no pull request, no development work at all yet on that one. So 3295, any Mac users that are out there that want to help make an improvement to the Safari experience of Backdrop, please take a look at 3295. Let's see. That's it for 1.10. Oops, 1.11.2 issues.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
There is 3305 about the new info message, and it affects the available update display, which looks quite strange now because of the new .info class, or because of the changed .info class. 3305.
Yeah,
I think we could also. It doesn't have a milestone yet, but I think it should also be fixed for the next bug fix release.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I noticed that while I was working on which ticket was it? Hold on a second, bear with me, please. I think 37. No, it wasn't. Sorry, I forgot the ticket now. It was mentioned in the design agenda. Which one of the tickets? Design attempts. The installer 2873. So while I was working on that, I noticed this. Yeah, and I agree. It shouldn't be a big fix. Like maybe change the class there or something.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I've added this one to the agenda here. 3305, that we have a regression with the new info status type. It mistakenly colors available updates blue. Looks like that's the summary of the problem.
Yeah.
Not a big deal. Probably not a big difficult thing to fix either. But awesome. Thank you. And thank you, Opie, for filing, or sorry, Lauren for filing the issue, and Opie for cross-linking them. Okay, awesome. Anything else before I continue on? Okay, thanks, Ola.
Yep.
Okay, so items for 1.12. The 1.12 release will be coming out January 15th, 2019. And we have a collection of fun things that we've got in store here. These are only tentative at this point. We could potentially add additional functionality, but right now we've got 4 items to pull out here for the 1.12 release that we're working towards. The first one is core updates, working towards automatic updates. The meta issue for that is 2018. And the area where most excitement is happening is in issue 414, which is where Jeff has been working on making it so that we expose the user interface for doing updates, and also add in the automatic portion of things. I also want to call out the fact that now that 1.11.1 is out, that means that we have 1.11.0 that has core update functionality in it, but disabled in the UI. And we finally have a bug fix release to update 2. Yay, so that's exciting. Also exciting.
It means we can test things, you mean?
Yeah, I tried it out right before the meeting. Totally worked. So that was very exciting. So I turned on, it's in installer settings.json, the config file, where the flag is that currently has it disabled in the user interface to prevent end users from accidentally accessing something that might not totally work yet. But yeah, it worked pretty well. It does loop around through a bunch of like authorize.php, and it doesn't run the updates for you. It's not the same. It's not quite as smooth a process as installing a new module. because honestly, the module updater has always been pretty clunky. So anyway, but it is exciting that the basic functionality works well, and that's totally awesome. Jeff, do you want to give an update on 414 if there's been any progress there?
I think the progress is I made a little UI to checkbox whether you want to check for automatic updates, and then I got the skeleton of having it run on hook cron, but there's some details to be worked out.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, let's see. Another issue related to this, well, there's a bunch of them in 2018, the meta issue. Package signing, issue 1992. We don't have any further updates on that one, so I'm not going to rehash that one again. There's also issue 3208, which is removing authorized.php or deprecating it. If we followed through with this approach, it probably would streamline that user interface for updating modules, or sorry, updating core that I just mentioned, that when I ran through it locally, it redirects you all over the place prior to it actually doing the update. And it's not entirely intuitive, because it looks like updates have been applied, but then it asks you, it sends you to authorize.php, you click a button, and then it sends you to another page, and it says, now you have to go to update.php, and then you click go to update.php, and then update.php says there aren't any updates. It's just like, why all of these hoops to jump through? So
did that happen because of your permission set, do you think? I don't think that typically happens to me.
You know, I'm not sure, because it should have, you know, my permissions are set so that Backdrop should have been able to write directly to the file system, and so it shouldn't have needed authorized.php in the first place. So I'm not entirely sure why that ended up happening.
I'll run a test. I'll do a test run over the weekend, and I'll file a ticket if no one beats me to it, if I notice the same things for UX.
Okay. Yeah, and you might you might be able to lump it into 414 as well, where Jeff is doing his work. Anyway, automatic updates and just core updates in general, it's looking pretty good and pretty exciting. So that's very, very great. Let's see, next up is tags for modules, issue number 37. This issue currently needs review. I think Jen rolled the new pull request recently. Has that gotten any attention, Jen, since you filed the pull request? No,
I don't think so.
Okay, so that one is probably ready for some code review. We've had a lot of back and forth. I think we're all solid on the direction finally. And the implementation is fairly simple. So that issue number 37 makes it so that modules have tags in their .info files. And initially, this is only going to be used in the Backdrop modules page, but it will eventually be used for the module installer browser to find new modules, and probably on the modules pages themselves on backdropcms.org. Let's see. Next up is options element. Options element in core is issue number 1005. This takes the options element module out of contrib and puts it into the options module directly, so that instead of having the big text area where it's like enter one option per line, separate keys and values with a vertical pipe, it creates a dedicated user interface for replicating that in a way that is a lot more intuitive. Also allows for nice dragging and dropping of options. And if you want to, you can switch back to the old text field-based UI to copy and paste like them all in bulk. So it's very exciting. Jen, you said that you were taking a look at it just before this meeting. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It looks really great. I just took it for a spin in the sandbox, and it's really intuitive. If you're just going to type in a bunch of items, you can tab through all of the fields, which is really handy too. I just left a couple of little minor UX recommendations for the interface now that we have sort of a big interface with new options. But I think it's a huge improvement over what we have now. So I'm really excited to see that go in. That vertical pipe thing was always something that seemed very half done to me in Drupal, where it's like, oh, here's an interface where you can enter things, but you can't really enter them cleanly, and Options Element fixed that. So getting this done for all fields, I think, is going to be a huge improvement, just making the product feel more finished.
Yeah, and because it'll make a new in-core field type, basically, Options Element will become a new Form API type. That makes it so that any module that needs this pattern will have it available without an additional dependency, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But it does make it so that stuff like web form module would then probably become dependent on options module. But options module is always there, so it's probably not going to hurt anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And the last issue that we have to call out attention to is fieldable file types. This makes it so that files have proper bundles, and then you can add fields to the individual files. And that issue is 2632. The current status of it is that it needs a little bit of work regarding user interface questions. At least that's where we left it off last time. I have given this a full code review, and it looks really great overall. The large concern there is that it's also a massive amount of code because making files fieldable is a large undertaking. There's also one question of a potential API change in there regarding the path that gets returned on a file URI when you use the URI method. And so that's an outstanding question that needs to be addressed. I know when Mike McCaffrey was doing his reference field, he actually found that reference module, he actually found that what files are doing right now is not consistent with the way other entities work. And so I know this particular change would actually be welcomed by the reference module, but unknown, like, if that is going to be an acceptable API change. So anyway, 2632, definitely ready for end user testing. That's the big problem there, is that we have some questions around the UI of things, that some of the additional options are not intuitive or have similar labeling to options that already exist. So yay, we get to have more like discussions and arguments over terminology. It's a terminology party. Or figure out if maybe there's some things that the contrib version of file entity, maybe we don't need all of those things in core. That's another question. So 2632, even though it needs work, it's definitely working, and you can try it out via the sandbox on the pull request. There are other issues tagged for 1.12 that I won't go over at this time, but you can check them out in the GitHub milestone for the 1.12 release. That's it for the core update. Rolling along on things, the core updates in particular are just really pretty awesome now that we have the ability to test those adequately. And yeah, that's really pretty fantastic. Just as a personal aside, I've been working on a website for my brother, who has coincidentally a Drupal 7 site that is installed on an Italian shared hosting company, and had Drupal 7 installed with what's that word? Softaculous. Sorry, Jen, you're nodding, so I think I got it right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the software that basically aggregates a bunch of free software and makes it so you can install it. Because this site doesn't have any SSH access, so no Git, just FTP. And I'm just like realizing how impossible it is to manage a Drupal site or Backdrop site for that matter with just FTP. It is just really difficult. And so this is kind of in the category of, where the audience that we're trying to serve, not even kind of, it is in the category of the audience we're trying to serve. And had Drupal had the ability to update core itself, it would have made life a little bit easier for myself, or install modules from the user interface, or do all kinds of things that we have in Backdrop. So it's interesting to see the problems that Drupal has had for a long time not really affecting us, or affecting us less, or we are working towards solutions for these particular problems. So just kind of funny that, I don't normally work on websites of that type, but having inherited one, I realize, yeah, look at that target person struggling with their website. And we're trying to provide the solution for that. So anyway, just non sequitur. Just ran into all of these things that would be nice to have if this were a Backdrop website, and maybe it will become a Backdrop website in the near future. We'll see. So that's it for the core updates. Jeff, do you want to do any update on the Backdrop for Good project?
I know that Laren did some stuff. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but there was some movement. And Herb Duel was pitching in with some advice, I know. So there's been a little bit of activity.
Okay. Let's see. General discussion and Q&A. Jen, did you put this in here? Follow up on follow WordPress-like policies for contrib projects. You want to tell us about that?
That was from last week. I thought we should follow up again with it this week. This was Kevin wanting to bring up our contrib licensing issues. So he was here last week and talked about it a little bit, where because we're on GitHub, we have more flexibility than Drupal.org about the licensing for our contrib, but it also doesn't have to be exactly the same as core. So he was recommending that Backdrop core be GPL2 and Backdrop contrib be whatever you want, but you have to specify it in your contrib project. So maybe not whatever you want, but whatever you want, like it could be GPL2 or GPL3. And as long as you include the right license file, you'd be okay. But the way that our contrib is formatted right now is that it requires you to include the GPL2 license file, which restricts you from being able to include GPL3 contrib projects. And he had some that included external libraries that could be GPL3 but not GPL2. And so he was recommending that we soften the requirements around licensing on contrib, even though core might need to stay the same. And that would improve the types of contrib stuff we could get and make it easier on contrib developers. So I think I said that all the same way he said it last week. If anyone was here last week and remembers what he said, feel free to correct me.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, you're here?
That was
Is it
awesome.
the same, Kevin? I was about to say, is it the same, Kevin?
Yeah.
Did I get it right?
Yeah, you're completely right. So
Good.
I'm glad I was on mute. Just let you run with that.
So Nate, you weren't here last week, so I wanted to put that on today's agenda again, just to make sure that we revisited that. And then I think last week we were all kind of in agreement that contrib should be softer than core. But we should finalize that and write it down somewhere and then update all of our documentation so that anyone who's working contrib knows that they can choose whatever license as long as they include it, and that it, or not whatever license, but whatever options we want to provide them, and be a little clearer about that. So do you have any thoughts on that, Nate? Any concerns or anything that we haven't thought of that you think should be addressed, or?
I don't. Well,
are you reading the GPL2 versus 3 details? Yeah.
yeah. I've always felt that these things are. I mean, they're important, but they're also at the same time
Boring.
Esoteric. Yeah, I think actually. I like that we're not locking ourselves in for core, and I do feel like contrib should have that freedom. And so at first blush, I'd say, yeah, this looks like a good idea. And then beyond that, I'd probably say, you know, I'm really not a licensing expert, so I'd like to defer to those that have more experience, like Kevin, for example, on, you know, what we should do here. So I think it's the proposal sounds pretty good. Looks like you made a PMC issue as well, Jen. So I guess we can discuss it further amongst the PMC. But I probably am not going to be able to comment like decision-making wise on on this short notice.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that you didn't like have some specific feeling about 2 versus 3 that I wasn't aware of. But yeah, I think in general, we all were like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So I opened a PMC issue. I think right now it's tagged as open for discussion. So if anyone wants to chime in on that, they can, and we'll try and consult Kevin as necessary if anyone has any questions about what specifically that means.
Or Jen, you can just ask Jen.
Yeah. What does this mean? Here's a question for you, Kevin. What does this mean if a contrib project was GPL3 only? They said this is only GPL3, but then we wanted to incorporate that project into core later.
You wouldn't be able to without changing the license,
right?
And that is an issue. And so Drupal's is GPL2 or later, giving them the freedom to change in either direction at any time, but then only hosting GPL2 on Drupal.org. And so it definitely simplifies things, but it also restricts things. And the same type of things, if you read about the Redis Common Clause, I don't know how to describe that, their attempt to monetize their code. There's just so much going on with licensing in regard to that, while the major players are standardizing around Apache 2 as the go-to license for a lot of these libraries. And what I said last week was that it also doesn't necessarily have the PHP license doesn't necessarily have to apply to the JavaScript. Drupal made the decision not to try to cut hairs there and figure out what JavaScript was actually required to inherit the GPL2 license, and just said that everything on Drupal.org, regardless of how it's used, has to be GPL2 compatible. Mm-hmm. So you can make it more complicated, but I feel like WordPress's approach hasn't gotten them in legal trouble and has allowed their contrib to flourish. I mean, there's just a lot going on there, and it doesn't cause too many problems. But you're totally right that if something was leveraging an Apache 2 library and you wanted to bring that into core, and the module was being distributed as GPL3 because of that, you wouldn't be able to do that. But you wouldn't be able to do it if you decided that you wanted to leverage that Apache 2 library. I think in the documentation, people should be suggested to use GPL2 unless there's a specific reason to do otherwise.
Yeah, I think that was more what I was thinking of, is that we don't want a module to be GPL3 for no particular reason without any dependencies. In the event that module became a candidate for core, we wouldn't want to have to, deal with, but this is GPL3, and so we can't include it, even though there was no particular reason for it. So I think you're right. We should encourage people strongly to do GPL2 or later, to make it so that we have that flexibility to incorporate into core later. But if there's a reason, like a dependency on Apache 2 library, especially if it's bundled, then allow them that flexibility. That sounds great. And I think we can update our documentation to say that. And when we go through the contrib approval process, we can also have a chance at checking it there.
Yeah.
It does feel like sort of like a PMC decision thingy. But as you said, because none of us is an expert with licenses, if we could compile a list of pros and cons, like what we gain by allowing that, and then if there are any possible, I don't know, traps there that could, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, I'll try and write that up in the issue.
Yeah, and as far as my first feeling as well from the summary that I heard now in this session is that, yeah, by all means, let's do it for contrib, and perhaps still leave the GPL2 as the default, but have a note somewhere in the documentation that if you do require GPL3, because to a simple person's mind, if you say GPL2 or later, they think that, oh, GPL3 is better than 2 because it's a newer version. So that's what they're going to do, but that's not the case. So I think, like in my head, it feels better to still leave the GPL2 as a default from what I've heard from you guys, with a note somewhere saying that if you do absolutely require to go GPL3, then by all means.
Yep.
But state the stakes after doing that, like, yeah, possibly running into troubles if you want to merge into core and so on and so forth.
Yep. Okay. Great. I think we managed to not confuse ourselves this time. Okay. Anything else? Okay.
Can I ask a quick question? Drupal core, and I mentioned this in Gitter. Drupal core, and somebody was asking about backdrop in the technical future. The only thing we had was the roadmap, and there's not very much on the roadmap. I'm just wondering, is there more somewhere else, or does, I don't know, would it be useful for us to have a better document or to think more about the longer term future, this beyond 1.12?
Yes. And there's actually, I think some things that we could easily pull out as being things that we want in core that we could put in kind of the more nebulous future. Mm-hmm. Things like we could go back through all of our previous releases and pull out everything that we've tried but have not succeeded in getting into core, like references in particular rings a bell for me, and put those into the more nebulous, like sometime in the future list. So I think that would be a good starting point, at least, to make it so that, I mean, if those things were important in the past, they're probably still important now. But things beyond that, I'm not sure, like what other things are really critical for us. And yeah, I think Tim had mentioned that, that could be an opportunity while we're all in person at the Backdrop Summit at BadCamp. Like, we could talk about the future a little bit, and if we have any long-term goals that would extend past the next past the next minor release. There we go. Yeah.
I think that when we were discussing this early on, and I'm guessing from what was said just now, it concerns the big tasks that are a huge undertaking and they're left, vaguely to the future. It was media, the references, and then multilingual. So because these were huge undertakings, there was something that I know that there's initiatives for D8 for these things, but because they're huge undertakings and we're a small group, they're just sort of like in the backlog waiting for the opportunity. I'm not sure if the roadmap references all these, but I definitely know that it states the intention of helping with multilingual.
Yep. Thanks, Gary. Those are some issues I had forgot, but you're absolutely right. They've come up and we've punted on them a couple of times. In some cases, we get 1/3 of it done, and so something happens, but it's not all of it yet. So great.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at the roadmap right now, and it's there's 4 items there: automatic security updates, which is happening, multilingual support, reduced theme complexity. I'm not sure what that meant, and then more systems moved into configuration, possibly including menu links and module state. These are the 4 items currently there.
That seems like references and oh wait, yeah, references and media are not in that list. Is that right?
Yeah, media was, yeah.
References was
References
slated
was-
for 1.x.
Yeah, and it was never moved actually. Although the tickets might have been moved to, actually the milestones have been removed from the tickets. We never added them to the goals for 2.0. I can actually edit and add comments for those two because I think they are a goal anyways.
Well, both of those I think could happen in the 1.x cycle now. So I don't know if we should have like a list of like things we can do in 1.x and then things we can't do until 2. Because I think that we used to think there was a lot we couldn't do until 2, and we're discovering that there's a lot we can actually do in 1. So that might be something we should revisit too.
Yeah, so here's an idea. What about if we add another point there in the roadmap that says goals for 1.x besides 2.0, because the automatic security updates is already happening in 1.x, and we move that item there anyways.
Yeah. That sounds good. And then we can put anything else that we know we can work on there. That we can
I think that the consensus was that anything that was constituting an API breakage, like, because API additions are allowed, but everything that constitutes an API breakage, then we moved that to 2.0. And I think there was mention of, I can't remember where it was, not necessarily API changes, but there was discussions about changing the menus or the paths of items, Jen, that we moved. So yeah, there were some items that were definitely pushed for that 2.0 because of that.
Unless we can find another way.
Anyway,
we're getting increasingly good at
more deprecating
compatibility. It seems like, and more deprecating. Yep.
Yeah, It seems that more and more items were slated for 2.0 because we thought they were going to be too complex, and we're like, you know what?
Turns out,
what if we did
Jeff
this?
could do it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I think that does it for the meeting today. Thank you, everybody, for joining, as always, and thank you guys for watching. And yeah, just keep on backdropping. We'll see you guys on the internet.
Bye, everyone.
See you guys.
Goodbye.